The tropical sun hadn't yet broken over the jungle canopy when Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning. His hands, already stained black with grease despite the early hour, worked methodically through the pre-flight inspection. Above him, Lieutenant Robert Hayes climbed into the cockpit, his face betraying the fear that every combat pilot learned to mask. It was mid-August, 1943. The date would later matter more than anyone realized. McKenna had been maintaining these aircraft for 8 months. He knew every rivet, every panel, every quirk of the twin-engine fighter that pilots either loved or feared depending on whether they'd survived their first dogfight. The P-38 was fast in a straight line, devastating at high altitude, and absolutely unmatched in American firepower. But it had one problem that was killing men every single day. It couldn't turn with a zero. The Japanese Mitsubishi, a 6M0, was lighter, more agile, capable of executing a full horizontal turn in roughly half the time a Lightning needed. In the brutal arithmetic of aerial combat, that difference meant death. American doctrine was clear and repeated in every briefing. Never turn with a zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Dive in, shoot, climb out, hit and run. Don't get caught in a turning fight. Lieutenant Hayes had tried following that doctrine 5 times. It hadn't worked. The Zeros were too smart, too experienced. They baited American pilots into turns, cut inside their turning radius, got on their tails, and shot them down with methodical precision. The 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s in the past 6 weeks. Most were shot down after being caught in turning engagements they couldn't escape. McKenna had watched too many pilots die. Good men, really just kids, with a few weeks of combat experience and a lifetime of confidence that evaporated the moment they faced an enemy who could outfly them. They climbed into their Lightnings with determination and came back in boxes, or didn't come back at all. The training manual blamed pilot error. The instructors said these pilots weren't following doctrine. But McKenna knew better. The problem wasn't the pilots. It was the control cables. The P-38's aileron control cables ran through the twin booms to the tail section, then forward through pulleys to the wing control surfaces. The cable system had slack, not much, maybe 3/8 of an inch at full deflection. That tiny bit of slack created a delay between stick movement and aileron response. At high speeds during diving attacks, it didn't matter. But at low speeds during hard turning maneuvers, that fraction of a second delay was the difference between rolling inside a zero's turn and getting shot down. McKenna had mentioned this to the engineering officer 2 months earlier. The officer said the cable tension was within specifications. Factory tolerances allowed for that slack. Changing it would void the aircraft warranty. Besides, no field mechanic had authorization to modify flight control systems. That required engineering approval from Lockheed, and Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in California, probably receiving reports and filing paperwork while men died in the South Pacific. So McKenna did something that violated every regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual. He took a piece of piano wire from a damaged aircraft, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z shape, and installed it as a tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron control cable. The modification took 8 minutes. It added 4/10 of a pound of tension to the cable. It eliminated the slack completely. Nobody noticed. The inspection crew didn't check cable tension that morning. They were focused on engine oil levels and ammunition loads. McKenna said nothing. He watched Hayes taxi to the runway, watched him take off, watched the P-38 disappear into the morning sky toward 18 Japanese fighters waiting to intercept the morning patrol. What happened in the next 17 minutes would change how every P-38 in the Pacific Theater flew. The first pilot McKenna had lost to a zero was Lieutenant David Chen. Early July, 1943. Chen had been in theater for 3 weeks. They'd talked about California during morning maintenance checks. Chen was from Sacramento, McKenna from Long Beach. They'd both worked on cars before the war, back when the biggest problem was a stuck carburetor instead of an enemy fighter trying to kill you. Chen took off on a fighter sweep and came back 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes in his left boom and a story about a zero that had gotten inside his turn. He said he tried to roll out and dive away like the manual instructed, but the airplane felt slow to respond, like there was a delay between when he moved the stick and when the aircraft actually rolled. The Zero had almost gotten him. Only his wingman shooting the Zero off his tail had saved his life. McKenna looked at those bullet holes. They were in a tight group. Perfect deflection shooting. The Zero pilot had led Chen perfectly, had anticipated exactly where Chen's airplane would be. That shouldn't have been possible if Chen had rolled hard and dove immediately, unless the airplane had delayed just long enough for the Zero to get the lead right. Chen didn't fly again. His aircraft went back to the depot for repairs. 3 weeks later, McKenna heard Chen had been killed flying a different P-38. Same story. Caught in a turning fight. Couldn't roll out fast enough. The second pilot was Captain William Morrison. Morrison was a flight leader with 11 kills. He knew the P-38 inside and out, knew its limitations, flew smart. In early August, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet. Morrison got 1 Zero on the first pass, came around for another run. 2 Zeros reversed on him. McKenna heard the radio traffic afterward. Morrison tried to roll inverted and split S away. Called out that his controls felt mushy. The Zeros stayed with him through the maneuver. Shot him down at 4,000 feet. Morrison's wingman said it looked like Morrison's airplane wasn't responding fast enough, like he was fighting the controls. Morrison died in the crash. The official report said pilot error. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. He'd worked on all their aircraft, had signed off their maintenance logs, had watched them taxi out. Some came back, some didn't. The ones who came back told the same story. The P-38 felt slow to respond in hard maneuvering, like there was a slight lag between control input and aircraft reaction. Most pilots thought that was just how the airplane handled. Heavy fighter, big control surfaces, some delay was expected. But McKenna knew that wasn't normal. He'd felt that delay with his own hands when he worked on the control cables. That tiny bit of slack in the system, that low twang when you plucked them during maintenance checks. Loose cables sounded different than tight cables. McKenna could hear the difference. Every P-38 on the line had cables that sounded slightly loose, within specification, but loose. The problem wasn't that American pilots didn't know what to do. They knew. Every briefing emphasized it. Never turn with a Zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Hit and run. The doctrine was clear. The problem was that combat didn't follow doctrine. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old, farm kid from Iowa. He'd flown 6 combat missions and had 0 kills. Not because he was a bad pilot, because he followed the rules. And the rules kept putting him in positions where he couldn't get a shot. On his 3rd mission, Hayes dove on a Zero from altitude, built up speed to 400 miles per hour, came in from the sun like the manual prescribed. Got the Zero in his gun sight, started to pull lead for deflection. The Zero snap-rolled left and dove. Hayes tried to follow. His P-38 rolled into the turn, but felt like it was moving through mud. By the time his aircraft pointed where he wanted it, the Zero was gone. His 4th mission was worse. He and his wingman jumped 2 Zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes got the first burst off, missed. The Zero reversed hard right. Hayes rolled to follow. His wingman called out 2 more Zeros coming in from above. Hayes tried to roll back level and dive away. The airplane responded, but slowly. Just slowly enough that one of the diving Zeros got a 3-second burst into Hayes's right boom with 20mm cannon shells. His 5th mission, Hayes watched his wingman die. The wingman's name was Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21 years old, from Boston. They'd gone through training together. Parker got separated from the formation during a dogfight. 2 Zeros got on his tail. Parker tried everything, rolled hard, reversed, tried to scissor. The Zeros stayed with him through every maneuver. Hayes heard Parker on the radio calling for help, heard the panic in his voice, heard him say his airplane wasn't turning fast enough, heard the gunfire, heard Parker scream, then nothing. Parker's bed stayed empty that night. His personal effects got packed up and shipped home. His P-38 was written off as a combat loss. The maintenance log noted no mechanical issues. The official cause was pilot error during defensive maneuvering. McKenna had worked on Parker's aircraft that morning. Everything was perfect. Engine timing, control surface alignment, cable tension within specification. The airplane was fine. But Parker was dead anyway, and McKenna knew why. On the evening before his next mission, Hayes came to the maintenance area and found McKenna working on his assigned P-38. Hayes asked if there was anything McKenna could do to make the airplane roll faster. Anything at all. Hayes said he didn't care if it was regulation or not. He just wanted a chance. McKenna looked at Hayes and saw the fear, saw the desperation, saw a kid who knew he was going to die if something didn't change. McKenna told Hayes to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. McKenna worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 2,300 hours. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. He pulled the inspection panel off Hayes's P-38 left boom. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail section. McKenna grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled, felt the slack, maybe 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension caught. He could feel that slack clearly. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire came from a salvaged P-38 that had ground-looped 2 weeks earlier. The aircraft was scrap, but McKenna had pulled useful parts before it went to the depot, including a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers, bent it into a Z shape. The wire was stiff, fought back against the pliers. His hands slipped twice, cut his thumb on the second try. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. Took him 8 minutes to get the bend right. The Z-shape would act as an inline tensioner, would add just enough preload to the cable to eliminate the slack. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was tight. McKenna had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. His shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge cut into his arm. He could feel sweat running down his back despite the night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin. Dropped it. Heard it bounce somewhere in the boom. Spent 5 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer found him doing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face a court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge, maybe prison time. But Hayes was going to die if McKenna didn't do something. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand, pulled on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off the wire and his hands, walked out of the hangar at 1:15 in the morning. The tropical night was humid and still. Somewhere in the distance, he heard aircraft engines. Japanese night raiders, probably. He just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard part, violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash and McKenna would be responsible. But if it worked, Hayes might live. McKenna went to his bunk, didn't sleep, watched the ceiling until dawn. At 6:30, he walked to the flight line, watched the crew fuel and arm Hayes's aircraft, watched Hayes walk out for his pre-flight briefing, watched him climb into the cockpit. At 7:42, Hayes took off. McKenna stood on the flight line and watched the P-38 climb into the morning sky, watched it join formation with 16 other aircraft, watched them head northwest toward Japanese airspace. And then all he could do was wait. The engagement started at 8:14. Hayes's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 9 Zeros at 13,000 feet over Huon Gulf. The morning sun was behind them, perfect setup for a diving attack. Hayes was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked a 0 at the back of the formation, dove from altitude, built speed to 380 miles per hour. The 0 grew larger in his gun sight. He could see the painted rising sun on the fuselage, could see the pilot's head in the canopy. He pressed the trigger. The 4 50 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon hammered. Tracers reached out. Most missed. A few hits sparked off the 0's wing. Not enough. The 0 snap-rolled right and dove. Hayes rolled to follow. That's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay, no lag. The stick moved and the aircraft rolled immediately. Hayes had never felt his P-38 move like that. It was like the airplane had been waiting for his command and executed it the moment he gave it. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time. Got his nose down. The Zero was right there in his sight picture. He fired again. 3-second burst. The rounds walked up the Zero's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The Zero's engine exploded. Pieces flew off. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke. Hayes's first kill. But there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out Zeros, diving from above. Hayes looked up, saw 3 of them coming down in a shallow dive, coming fast. They'd seen him shoot down their friend. Now they wanted revenge. Hayes shoved the throttles forward, started to climb, but the Zeros were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep climbing, keep running. That was the doctrine. But doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left and pulled. The P-38 snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon. He saw the lead Zero. It was turning to follow him, but hadn't expected Hayes to reverse that fast. The Zero was in a bad position. Exposed, Hayes pulled lead, fired, hit the Zero in the left wing root. The wing folded. The Zero tumbled. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros tried to scissor with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantly. No delay, no fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. It was like flying a different aircraft, like someone had removed invisible weights from the control system. 1 Zero made a mistake, reversed too hard, bled too much speed. Hayes got inside his turn. Close range, maybe 200 feet. He fired. Couldn't miss. The Zero came apart. Pieces of aircraft fell past Hayes's canopy. He felt the P-38 shudder as debris hit his right boom. 3 kills. The 4th, Zero ran. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude, reformed with what was left of his flight. They headed home. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at Dobodura at 9:03, McKenna was waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines, climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna. Hayes said 2 words. It worked. What neither of them realized was that 6 other pilots had watched Hayes's engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group. He'd been watching Hayes's element engage the Zeros below when he noticed something unusual. Hayes's P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater, knew their skill levels. Hayes was good, but not that good. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes was still running on adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked him what was different. Hayes said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today, faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Hayes said he should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. McKenna was working on a different P-38. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly, "What did you do to Hayes's airplane?" McKenna looked at him for a long moment, then told him everything. The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to his aircraft. McKenna said yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. He'd lost 4 pilots in his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38. Same piano wire tensioner, same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning, came back raving about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck, he told his wingman. The wingman told McKenna he wanted the modification too. By late August, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, said it was against regulations. Others were willing to try. McKenna showed them how. Cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, install it as an inline tensioner. Takes 8 minutes. Changes everything. The modifications spread pilot to pilot, mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 more. Other pilots started coming back from missions with kills. The statistics were impossible to ignore. By early September, maybe 40 P-38s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dobodura noticed something was different but couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. Nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every Zero destroyed. In August, it was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed. But officially, nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces with 64 confirmed kills. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. In early September, Sakai engaged a P-38 over WWII. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the P-38 to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll, knew the timing perfectly. But this P-38 rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai had to dive away. He returned to base confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same tactics, but their aircraft were responding faster, fractionally, but enough to matter. Enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months. The engines were the same. The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom. A 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found it, they might not have understood its purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system, wasn't a new engine, just a minor modification to control cable tension. But that minor modification was killing their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they hadn't seen since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Zero pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some pilots stopped trying to get into turning fights with P-38s, used hit-and-run tactics instead. But that meant giving up their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability. Fighting like a P-38 meant fighting on American terms, and the P-38 was faster, more heavily armed, and could take more damage. Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more risks. But aggression, without the ability to outturn the enemy, just meant dying faster. The fundamental problem for Japanese pilots was that they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They knew something had changed, but they didn't know what, and they couldn't figure out how to counter it. You can't develop tactics against a modification you don't know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were killing Zeros at better than 1-to-1. Japanese command ordered pilots to avoid engaging P-38s unless they had significant numerical advantage. That order marked a turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted. And it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October when a maintenance inspector at Dobodura noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks, while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations, but it was working. Fighter squadrons using the modification had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. The question wasn't whether the modification helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who'd installed it without authorization or quietly approve it after the fact. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests. Their conclusion was that the modification was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943. But McKenna never received official credit. No commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to engineering analysis. McKenna's name didn't appear anywhere. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, worked as a crop duster for 37 years. He never forgot what McKenna had done. Every year on August 17th, Hayes called McKenna to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander, led his unit through the Philippines campaign, shot down 16 aircraft. After the war, he stayed in the Air Force, retired as a colonel. He told the story of McKenna's modification to every young maintenance officer he supervised, made sure they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss. McKenna stayed in the Army Air Force until 1946, returned to California, went back to working on cars, opened his own garage in Long Beach. He worked on engines for 42 years. Never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic. Fixed airplanes, that's all. In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to the piano wire tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked down McKenna through veteran registries. McKenna was 73 years old by then, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. McKenna confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. McKenna said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back. Hayes, Mitchell, the others. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner, did not mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew, did not mention that he'd broken regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there, different owner now. But on the wall in the back office, there's a faded photograph. A young mechanic in coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The date written on the back is August 1943, New Guinea. That's how innovation actually happens in war, not through official channels or engineering committees. through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives.